I'm podcasting angry.
Good start.
Yeah. And I was gonna say you both kind of walked in.
Do you
like,
want to just turn this into a rant podcast?
I think we should
Where we just complain about everything.
Yeah.
Podcast isn't that what we do anyway?
Yeah, I was like, that's the majority
Kind
of
of conversation.
That's the majority of our conversations. Welcome to Shoot the Breeze, a series on our podcast that celebrates the messiness of life, relationships, and Christianity, featuring my wife Lacey and myself, Nathan. It's creatively titled because it will be just us shooting the breeze, sometimes with guests, while occasionally saying something important. We hope you enjoy. With me, I have my friend Joe on the right, and Daniel on my left, or if you're watching this,
Opposite.
Stage.
They'll figure it out.
Stage left, stage right. Your right, my left. Okay. That's about as clear as the rest of the conversation's gonna go. Thank you guys so much. Can you guys give, because you both are in fields that require a lot of education. You're an engineer, Joe, and Daniel, you are I was going to say a nuclear physicist.
No.
You're Einstein.
Not that much education.
What would you say your job title or your qualification title? What would that be? What's the right word?
I don't know.
We did a whole podcast together. Like, what is it?
I guess the question is why don't you remember it?
It sounds like you're asking for my current job, but you're also asking for my,
Yeah, you're...
What I used to do is more, I think, like, I operated a nuclear reactor on a submarine, but, that gave me a lot of schooling and stuff like that. But the rest of my life has basically been learning about things. Okay. So it's like I don't have any, I have a bachelor's in criminology and criminal justice, but that's not really...
That's fantastic.
That's not really part of this conversation.
You know what? We're going to switch to that.
We're going from science
true
to
crime.
criminology.
Yeah, I love true crime stuff. So, the question, so you and I, Daniel and I, left our last podcast. Essentially, we were talking about creation, and I quickly threw out as a goodbye was, I personally don't know how reconciling evolution with the cross, right? With the need for the death, because of death, the need for the cross. And then you and I have again, not teased the conversation, but never had actually had it. So
Can you refresh me again? Yeah. What the end was?
So let me tell you what your stance was. No. Let me tell you what you believe. No.
It was really dumb stance. Yeah.
No, we ended with, can evolution, I'm trying to remember myself, can evolution fit into Christianity if there was no death before Adam? Evolution demands, evolution demands death, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was the conversation. And again, Joe, you and I kind of teased this conversation and never actually had it. And so I thought, for the sake of fun and everyone being able to listen to our conversation.
Well, I think maybe to start, maybe it'd be better to break down both sides of that. Yeah. What that actually means. So why one side would mean the other side couldn't be possible, or vice versa. Okay. What are the... Is it an either just to clarify or? For me, and also the
is it an either or? Yeah. So, and you, with that, then you have the spectrum, because I know multiple Christians who believe God created through evolution, and we're talking macro evolution, not micro. Want to give some clarity there. Micro evolution is change within species or kind. Macro evolution would be changes into other species.
Right. Good.
Is that a fair definition?
I think it's a good definition. Okay. Macro. I guess another way of saying it too is macroevolution is the theory that everything came from single-celled organisms all the way up to these magnificent specimens here. And microevolution is more like natural selection type concepts is how it happens. It's like there's tweaks and changes in a species as a result of environmental pressure. And so certain species survive better because their genes are better suited for the environment.
Right.
So you see changes based on that.
Are you referring to us as magnificent specimens?
You and me
I did not
specifically.
think, I almost didn't say it because I figured it would be a given on this.
Well, thank you, Joe. No, and
Very
that idea is
As he
that
slicks back his hair, which neither Joe nor I have.
Well, I mean, it's slick there, that's for sure.
I'm trying this new product. I don't know if I like it. Lacey asked
Shave
me.
it,
She
it's
goes,
easier that way.
well, I was gonna make a joke, but
Back on topic.
yes. You guys really
So
talked about
on one side of the argument,
So
Well,
yeah, so let's take a true atheistic definition.
because this sounds.
Yeah.
Hold on, I just want to clarify what we're talking about because you started talking about evolution, but is that the same thing or a different conversation as the death conversation?
I think that's it. The point of this.
That's the same conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would view it, but that's
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I would say that, I mean, at the extreme ends of what we're talking about, or where you were about to go, I think, is the extreme atheistic evolution and only evolution from the beginning, completely random chance, nothing, no God, nothing like that, and everything developed out of the sludge of primordial Earth, blah, 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 up to here. Versus the other extreme end, the other extreme end, which is, 7 day creation as we measure time, 2 day, 24 hours, and along those concepts. So I would say those are the two extreme ends that kind of guardrail our conversation.
Yeah.
Everything would be in between there.
Yeah.
And
Right, but to go in more specifically, Nathan, I think, was talking about the point of when he created Adam and Eve, before they sinned, would they have died?
Oh yeah, that was another part
Or
of our
would they
conversation.
not have died?
or was
Right.
there
I
death
thought-
in the world?
Right, I thought that's where we're...
Oh,
So
I
we were
mean-
going somewhere else?
No, but that is a part of all of
That's
this,
part
right?
of his argument.
Okay.
Yeah. And so maybe I'm trying to think of how to like get the conversation ball rolling.
Well, it sounds like you believe something and Joe believes maybe something different, so why don't you just talk briefly about your beliefs,
Sure.
and then Joe will elaborate or
Is that fair, Joe?
counter.
I was supposed to be the one that's watching you two argue or something like that. And then you give
Guys,
your
this-
ideas as well.
This is
I
not
think
an
it's good.
argument. This is a conversation. Honestly, though, actually,
Well, it sounded like you. The reason I mentioned that way because it sounded like you might disagree, or at least with part of what Nathan said, and I'm not sure which way I'm going yet on this. So
That's right.
Well, and-
Okay.
and
so that's why I thought you could talk about
and
it.
I want
That's
to.
here.
I've wanted to have this conversation with somebody, with people, because it's one of those that. Just as a listener, I mean, one of the things both you and I enjoy, I don't know if you've listened to it, but the Bible Project.
Oh, yeah.
Gosh,
Yeah,
fantastic.
okay. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's, you hear them discussing stuff, and I'm like, oh, wait, that does bring up, regardless of whether or not I agree fully 100% with whatever line they take, I just appreciate listening to people's conversation on different subjects, so I can be like, oh, I never thought of that. That's a great argument against what I believe. I'm going to have to chew on some stuff. So anyways, basically that's why I was wanting to have this conversation, is to have us talk through it and hopefully be beneficial for those listening, and maybe give you and I something to eat all of it, like chew on and think about. So my where I land, and I'm taking the hard line, and this isn't like, when you have to go to debate class and you have to get I fully embrace the belief that in a 7-day creation, I will preface, that is not necessarily the purpose of Genesis, though. I'll concede that. The first 2 chapters of Genesis are not a scientific book to prove 24-hour, 7 days creating. I will say other areas point back to Genesis, the 2 poems, chapter 1 and chapter 2, as literal, though. So while Genesis inherently is poems, metaphor, you do see other writings taking literal stances on the subject. So one example is when Jesus talks about marriage and he points back to Adam and Eve. Paul does the same thing. He points back to Adam and Eve as a fact, as these facts that happen. And so I land on the side of 7-day creation, and one of the big, I guess, the fallbacks for me is as to why it is because if there was no death before Adam and Eve, let me rephrase that, sorry. If there was death before Adam and Eve, then what is the curse? What is the things that transpired in Genesis 3? Why would Jesus be so important if that wasn't an actual event where things got broken? Right? So we see in creation chaos being brought together into peace or rest, and then Adam and Eve with the temptation kind of, what is it, where you give off your responsibility, you abdicate it. Yeah. They abdicated it to the enemy. And so then you're stuck in this area of chaos again. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole point. We need Jesus to restore chaos back to order. Mm. So that, in a nutshell, and I don't know how deep down my rabbit hole that we want to go, but that's where I'm landing for right now. Okay. And I guess So
just to reiterate, make sure I understand, you're basically saying that if... I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hey, come on, man.
I was gonna pull up something relevant, but
didn't you ask us how to turn that off?
Yeah.
Well, I thought of something. Just let me talk. You're saying that if Adam and Eve had not sinned,
right,
they would never have died.
Yeah,
and once they sinned, then that brought in the need for Jesus.
So that, and that would be, make sure I get my
Romans
I's crossed and my T's dotted. So my belief is that in God, in a perfect relationship with God, He created us to live forever. That was part of His design in union with Him, right? We're not gods ourselves, so it's not separate from Him. But what happened with Adam and Eve in the garden and choosing to separate themselves from God is it brought about this. A friend of mine calls it like a death DNA that we started to. What is the law of thermodynamics?
Entropy.
Yeah, entropy. We started to, thank you. That we started to break down at that point because there was a separation from our relationship.
I love that you know the word entropy. That's just...
It's a measure of chaos.
It's
chaos.
Oh man.
Guys, we're smart here.
Entropy and enthalpy.
Guys,
enthalpy is another fun one.
I know. You and I were actually talking about entropy.
Anyway.
Yeah. No, you and I were talking about entropy in our last podcast.
Yeah. So,
I mean, it's a very good word to describe a concept that most of us don't think about.
Yeah.
So, but live with every day. It's like you have to clean your room. Well, you have to put energy into your room to decrease the entropy in the room.
Right.
But you increase the entropy, the chaos somewhere else. Blah blah blah, all that stuff. So anyway, sorry, that's really off the.
Yeah. Right. No. Right. Yeah.
So. What's your view on this then?
So I think we want to get off right off the bat that it is not something that have dived into. Yeah, doved into. Wait, what did you say? Somebody's going to correct us. I know they're going to write something in there. So
it can't be dove. That looked like dove.
No, I was.
Right?
It's not. Right? It's dovened. You've dovened into
dividend. Anyway. But
the three people who care about science out there are going to be like, those guys.
They don't know what they're talking about, or the person who cares about grammar.
Yeah.
But more to the point, I mean, the caveat I want to throw out here is, and it's something you and I talk about too, is that the fun part of this conversation is that our faith isn't dependent upon this, and I think that's an important thing to do. In these kind of conversations, it's important to ask the question, okay, what I believe here is this, what I believe here is that, based on this. But if the whole point of science is to bring evidence and to draw conclusions based on that evidence, not to develop a religion based on that evidence, but to draw conclusions and to be willing to have your mind change by new information that might change some of the assumptions you make right there. And so I think that's the mistake a lot of Christians make on the evolution argument. I'm not saying what I believe quite yet, but I'm just wanting to surround this one with what I think is an important caveat for this board of conversation is if you set your faith in something like this, like a lot of Christians have in the past, and then somebody comes out and points out what is an obvious flaw or not so obvious flaw, is your faith going to be broken? And so it's always important to remember our faith is not based on some scientific evidence or some belief about evolution versus not evolution. It continues to be based in Christ, in Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, that's a great point, and I actually, one of the things when I have discussions, whether it's a scientific discussion or a theological discussion, is my ground rule is, do we agree on who Jesus is and what he accomplished?
Yeah. Right.
I'm literally willing to talk about anything else, but if we start to mesh who Jesus is and what he accomplished with science, with, what do you believe about sin nature, whatever these other tertiary issues are, and it's like, wait, okay, maybe we can't have the conversation because we're starting to blend definitions, and I think your point is fantastic that we need to be able, and it's strengthening, right?
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
the point of these conversations. Is it's like I said, start off with, hey, what are thoughts that you've had, and I want to
right. And
learn from it,
fight through the way through.
Yeah.
And we just refer to it as primary doctrine versus secondary and tertiary doctrine. It's like primary doctrine is Jesus Christ. Tertiary doctrine is how to. Well, I don't even have an example.
No, now I'm curious as to
evolution, maybe. Okay, evolution. There we go.
Yeah.
Or creationism, but some people even argue with that. But that's not the point. I mean, if it enables you, if you set your entire foundation based on something that could be blown away in an instant by a random piece of information, then you've set your thing on very, very shaky ground indeed, on sand. I mean, is your house built on sand or is it built on the rock? And sand is pretty much anything that humans touch and develop on their own in a lot of ways. Yeah. Which includes science, which, not political at all, but we've seen quite easily corrupted lately. But has always been corruptible because it's a tool. And so it's important to remember science is an incredibly useful tool, but it is not a religion, and it is not the foundation of anything of moral beliefs or religious beliefs that we should set our life in. Okay.
To quote the words of Dr. Frank Turek, science doesn't say anything, scientists do.
Exactly. Science is a methodology for determining how something happened. And so my thoughts on religion, evolution, that was ironic, Freudian slip maybe. No.
Freudian slip.
No. But my thoughts on it are that it has been a method. It is a tool by which God has used to develop the world. I don't believe, and it was important, I don't believe in the atheist belief of chance. First of all, it's an interesting, we could have a conversation about the idea of chance in a world with an omniscient God, but that's not this conversation right now. But I don't believe in that. I believe it's a tool. I had a friend whose faith in God was actually much increased once she started understanding evolution better, because for her, she thought about it as like, okay, so I can believe in an all-powerful God that created created the universe and the world in 6 days, which is awesome. But is it not just as awesome to have a God that is so powerful and so unimaginably wise and all-knowing that he can develop the entire universe over 13 billion years? Turn it loose on its natural processes and let it come out, and so that the whole universe develops in this time frame from beginning to end. So I don't go quite that far with her, but it was always a fascinating statement for her, because her awe and love of God was increased by her knowledge of science. Her awe and love of God, because holy Jesus, this is amazing what God is able to do with these tools that he's put in there. We're not amorphous blobs of light that just live because God says so. He's designed this body incredibly intricately. And so her faith was very powerfully influenced by how all that happened. But you have to, even with that, she had to address obvious flaws in evolutionary theory, because things like we've talked about is how did certain things develop evolutionary-wise, like the eyeball or even the flagella on something like that. How do they develop by evolution? And so my belief on evolution is more of a mix of, yes, it is a natural process, but just like our lives, God supernaturally intercedes on a regular basis.
So would you, I'm trying to think of the right, summary, that God is intimately involved in the evolutionary process?
I think so. I think one of the mistakes that the scientific worldview has brought us to is the belief of a separated God from creation. But and I'm not saying that God is creation, but God made creation in a lot of ways. I've always read it like with his hands, or like with a very intimate knowledge.
Well, I believe it's Colossians that says nothing exists or nothing lives without his immediate presence.
Him being there and moving and shaking and tweaking, right? It's and so I think the mistake a lot of people make when they think of evolution is they think of the either or argument that we made earlier. It's either this or it's that, and I more see it as God has used this process, but he's a carpenter. It's a tool, and so his hands are going to be on his tools on a regular basis, moving in the world. Do I have any evidence of that? Well, that's always the way it goes. So it's interesting your degrees in criminology, because I think that points to we talked about evidence, and I think it was you that said it's how we interpret that evidence, not that evidence tells us anything. Is that? Is that right?
Case in point, it's like if you look at the beginning of the universe, when I mentioned to my dad that, Dad, I believe in the Big Bang Theory, he's like, Daniel, no. He was legitimately worried about me being a Christian, but
and you're not talking about God spoke and bang, it happened, right? Like that's
well. If you look at it, if you examine the evidence, like what Joe was saying, atheists believe that some natural cause caused something to form out of absolute nothing.
Right.
Like somehow we had no time, no space, no matter, but within no time, no space, no matter, how do you get a natural cause with no time, space, or matter that caused the Big Bang? So, when I look at it, it's like, well, if it's not natural, it had to be supernatural, and therefore, if someone chose to cause the beginning of the universe, then that's a conscious thought. It had to have a purpose behind it. It had to be pretty powerful because, well, how else do you create something from nothing? It's pretty powerful. It had to be pretty smart. Otherwise, how does everything fit together perfectly? So it's like you look at all of those attributes, and it's like that seems a lot like the Christian God. Right. It doesn't necessarily prove the Christian God at that point, but it proves that there is something supernatural. I think that began the universe, and that's the logic that I come to. But somehow atheists come to the conclusion of, no, like they observe the world around them and everything isn't, that they see has a natural cause, other than maybe DNA. But anyway, the
information.
So they look at that and they're like, we'll just hold out. Some might say they have blind faith that one day they'll find natural cause to something that seems like it had to be supernatural. And so, you look at that evidence, and I certainly believe that, like my point of view is whether maybe God did create it all in 7 days, and he just made it look like the Big Bang Theory, and he made it look a lot older than it really does. And my mind's not totally made up on that, because no matter which way you look at it, like, it had to be God.
Right.
Like, one way or another, it had to be God. So,
So I can conclude that you guys are not atheists.
Yes.
At best, you're agnostic. No,
because quick tangent, I know you're about to jump into something. I found it amusing, the phrase natural versus supernatural, because it implies that God's not natural. And I'm like, well, technically, he's literally the most natural.
I guess, that's a good point.
So,
I was using the scientific.
No, I know, but I didn't even think about it until right now. It's like, well, we use this phrase, he's not supernatural. He's more more natural than anything else.
That's a good point.
So it might be better to describe it as material cause versus a spiritual cause, or godly cause. I don't know. It's just
or like a divine cause,
or a miracle.
But the language controls a lot of what we say. It's like, oh, supernatural. That's outside of our belief. It's like, well, no. It's so it's interesting the words that have been entered into this argument.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. This is one of the many resources we make available for free at our website, cultivaterelationships.com. Our resources have helped people grow in their relationship with God and others. We've seen people set free from uncontrollable anger and paralyzing fear. We've witnessed estranged family members be reunited after working through our Freedom Booklet. We've helped people build healthy relationship and coping habits through our coaching videos. And all of these resources are made available for free because of the generous support of people like you. If you would like to become a partner, please visit cultivaterelationships.com/support. Now, I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Well, I think I think maybe in looking at history and Christian scientists, I think, and I forget the guy who came up with the law of thermodynamics. Do you guys remember? He was a Christian?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, he was a Christian, and I think it came out of his belief of this is how God essentially designed things to work naturally, right? But then you have him you see Jesus doing miracles, the supernatural, what is outside of how he generally operates set up to operate.
It's kind of like the exact opposite of Albert Einstein when he used to have the view of the universe that it was eternal, but then he found out that the general theory of relativity was like proven to like 7 decimal points or something like that. It's like, oh no.
Yeah.
Well, cannot have lived forever.
Yeah. So, oh man, I had some.
Well, I want to know Joe's point of view on the debt thing.
Yeah.
So,
well, honestly, I haven't given it a lot of thought because it's something we bounce around a lot. So I'm not gonna. I don't want to fall into the. A lot of people pick apart the creation story and they say, well, God, maybe he didn't mean literal 7 days, and I'm like, there's all sorts of poetic ways to describe the world without falling into these little traps. This is how God chose to describe the creation of the universe, and I think for very good reason, because the Genesis story, as Nathan has already pointed out, was never intended to be a scientific treatise on the creation of the universe. It was
that's something a lot of people forget.
Right.
Well, and I'll be honest, so that is relatively new for me to grapple with, because I've worked for creation organizations, and they always point to Genesis 1, and the more I study, the more I look at it, and so part of my struggle was like, oh no, do I believe in evolution? No, if that's not literal. But again, it's conceding. Okay, this is not. Oh goodness, when people ask, do you take the Bible literally? Well, yeah, the parts that are supposed to be.
Right.
And so it's like the creation stories, Genesis 1, Genesis 2, they come at creation at two completely different perspectives, and recognizing that's metaphor, that is poem, that is not meant to be taken literally until it is. So you have the law, which is very pragmatic, and God sets up, for instance, the Sabbath. And so he points back to here's how I did things. That's why the 7th day is so important for you to rest. And so that's what I mean is yes, it is metaphor. Yes, it is poetic. But then you have these people, Moses, other authors, pointing back to that poem, but then they give it a literal connotation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. And so it's recognizing, and I think that's kind of recognizing me kind of settling in, going, okay, things can be both and. Things can be poetic, things can be analogous, I think and literal, depending on.
Yeah, because the struggle I have with referencing the Bible in that way is that these people didn't have any greater, Oh, this is, I don't know if this is, I'm just going to keep talking and we'll see where it takes me. I might be wrong with this thought.
Hey man, this is the whole point of our podcast is messy.
Well, because, I mean, we're not talking about the scientific worldview that started to dig into these types of questions didn't really develop in this world until, I don't know, Renaissance maybe, before then, somewhere along there. I mean, it had its roots in a lot of things. And so in a lot of ways, these guys, they were still operating off the same basic framework of the cultures of the day, which did not see the universe's point of creation of 13 billion years old. For the most part, it was probably radical that they believed that the creation story they had. What was it? Most creation myths of the day were bloody in a lot of ways. Creation. I think this is a Bible podcast. They talked about it. Most creation myths were. There was a war, and we're the leftovers. There was a dead body of God, and that's the earth, or something like that. Not all of them, of course. That's too easy to go. But in a lot of ways, this myth kind of sprung out of nowhere in its own. It sprung out of this world was created very deliberately for the good of the people that God created, as opposed to we were created out of the corpse or blood of a dead God to serve the gods. Right. And so that in itself was this huge departure from what everything else happened. But these people are still operating by those myths. Even the disciples, Paul or whoever would have referenced it, would still be referencing in the worldview that did believe in that literal 7-day creation. And so I struggle with using that as a perfect analogy. I do like the argument of the death conversation. It's like, was there death beforehand? And if there wasn't, or if there was, then what was the tragedy of the fall? Then what exactly happened when Adam and Eve bit into the apple? And I actually do believe in a literal Adam and Eve, by the way. I do. You can play with that all you want, but once you kind of have the concept as God was aiming for something, he's going to tweak it, then I don't think it's that difficult to believe.
What do you mean a literal Adam and Eve?
An Adam and Eve in the garden.
I hadn't heard this point of view before. That's an actual... There's people who believe that, like,
that it's because it's
spiritualized
poetic
concept.
Yeah, because it's poetic. All Adam and Eve are in the Bible are a representation of at some point humanity strayed from God's design.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As opposed, and this comes into the both and concept. I might be wrong. Next year I might come back and say, well, here's what I read and here's what somebody told me. This is a bad one. But I don't see any sort of conflict between believing in both the concept of evolution and believing in elements of reality of the Bible, Adam and Eve. Just because it's poetic doesn't mean it doesn't have that solid core of truth buried in it.
So would you say, with looking at evolution, assuming evolution, okay, would it be then at some point taking the stance of, I'm going to completely read into the Genesis story, okay? So God formed man out of the dust of the ground, okay? We can say, over billions of years from single-celled organisms to fish, monkeys, whatever. And at some point then, God breathed into the nostrils the breath of life. Then humans became the image and likeness of God.
Right.
Would that be...
I think that's accurate, because because I struggle with the idea that self-awareness, which is a lot of ways it's a paltry way of calling it the breath of God, but the thing that differentiates us from animals, in essence, we are not animals. And animals, I don't believe, have souls.
A lot of the people whose pets died, you just...
I know, they're going to come after me now, but...
His name's Joe.
There are differences.
Where he lives is... No.
Well, I really want my dog Dash to be in heaven with me.
I know, dude.
It's like... That's a hard...
I don't think it's important to my theology. If I'm wrong, I'm going to gladly.
Well, I was going to say.
Well, the point is that we're going to be in heaven, and there's not going to be any crying anyway. So
I was going to say a fun, just as a freebie. The same word for breath in the nostrils is the same one as the animals have breath.
That's interesting.
I do remember that from...
I don't believe
going
that.
Back to the Bible,
I don't believe it, but it's just a fun thought.
Going back to the Bible Project podcast, they talk a lot about... there's like 2 or 3 episodes on breath and God's breath, and there is something interesting there where... It was really hard to explain in the English language, but he equated it to like batteries. Like every living thing has basically borrowed batteries from God. Like that's God's breath living inside of them. That's why they live. And it gets even more confusing because there's like there's like 4 different types of breath. One of them is like our breath. One of them is God's breath. One of them is like the life creation breath. And then I forget what the 4th one is. So it's like, it gets really confusing.
Well,
they clarified that it is different than a soul. So it's like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a...
Or the word like Elohim. It's the same Elohim as God, as also Elohims.
That's right.
Same word, all in context.
Right. It depends. It's like the God versus God. I mean, that one article makes a huge amount of change. But the point being is there is a difference, and I'm not of the belief that simply stacking brain cells on top of brain cells suddenly makes you conscious one day. That is a gift of God, and I think that's one of those supernatural elements within evolution where God breathed.
Sure. Yeah.
When we had developed to a certain point.
It makes sense with what you're saying. If God is intimately involved in the evolutionary process, then he would also be involved in that.
Exactly.
There's a tweak, change that happens that he's like, okay, now I'm going to put my breath into them. I'm going to put my image into them.
Because this is one of those things that evolutionary theory doesn't even come close to explaining.
Right.
What is consciousness?
Right.
That is a branch of science and philosophy all on its own.
Well, Joe, I
Yeah.
think, therefore I am.
I appreciate that, Rousseau. Rousseau?
No.
Damn, I wasn't even close. Descartes. That's
Descartes,
it.
yeah.
Descartes. There we go.
Yeah, that's the whole thing of where everything has to be natural.
Yeah.
Everything is material.
Right.
Like, well, then how come when you envision an ocean, your brain doesn't explode with water? I mean,
Right.
if everything's material, then
Right. It's interesting to read some scientists nowadays that are questioning the orthodoxy of science. There's like, the material is important to study and know, but it cannot explain everything. It's interesting to read some of them.
well,
It has
Some of them are
limits,
just
right?
kind of crazy, but there's a good portion. Sorry, what were you about to?
it's like they say that everybody's brain is just basically like a meat machine, and it randomly comes to conclusions. It's like, well, why do I need to believe anything you say if you're just a meat machine and what you put down in this book is just random thoughts by a random person? It's like, that doesn't really explain anything.
There is a brilliant line from a Russian atheist who says that, most atheists don't have the courage to face the utter despair of atheism.
Yep.
And it's like, a lot of people are trying to chase down meaning, and it's like, what is the meaning in this world, if it's everything is utterly random and chance? It's like, ugh. You try to force a meaning on it. But coming back, the death concept, it is an interesting one. I honestly don't have an answer for it. And that's why I love this conversation, because I'd never thought about that before, this idea that what was the point of the fall? Not the point.
Well, no. I know what you're saying. No, I know what you're saying.
What was the consequence of the fall if death was something that was around already?
I guess my question for Nathan is, what caused you to come to this conclusion? Like, why? It seems to me that your idea would mean that God messed up, or God didn't know the future in somehow. Like, why?
Like, with what?
Why would he's basically dooming his son to die? Like, and if he's not dooming his son to die, like if Adam and Eve would have lived forever, and God knew that they were going to sin and fail, then he knew he was dooming his son to die on the cross eventually.
Which,
or he didn't know the future. It's like there's some concepts there that seem like it'd be, well, God would have known that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's apart from the evolutionary conversation, if that makes sense.
Although we're talking about the death thing.
Well, we are, but more in the nature of how it relates to the evolutionary theory in there. The death question is going to be true whether he's right or I'm right, or, as is most likely, neither of us are right or wrong completely.
Well, let's not jump to any.
Well, that's where I was going with.
Hang on, why don't you just take that one and agree with me?
No.
My thought is, like, I think that there's just always going to be mysteries we're never going to be able to understand.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think God intended it that way on purpose.
Yeah. Well, and in Proverbs it says it was the desire of God to hide things, and he put it in
Mysteries.
Kings, to search it out. So, but I believe it is in, I think it's in Colossians. I might just have Colossians on my brain right now. But where he talks about he was crucified before the foundation of the earth. That this whole plan in God creating, he had already made, I hate to say a plan B, seems like a crude way to say it, but he made a
See, like that was my problem with your thought there.
Well, and
it's like, it's really a plan A, because it can't be a plan B, because God knew it would happen.
But knowing, that's a big jump from God knowing made it happen. That's a big jump right there.
Well, I'm not saying God made it happen, but if he knew it would happen, then why would it be a plan B?
Because I don't think it had to happen. Ooh. We're getting theological, guys. Let's stay scientific, okay? Come on.
but I want to dive into that concept. Is like theology and science should live together. They really should.
Joe, let's not mesh terms, okay? I don't want to have to explain myself.
Well, I mean, it makes sense.
It gets into
God gave us logic.
Right. It gets us into a concept called open theism, and there's varying degrees of open theism. The one I would not agree with is that God is just waiting to see what happens and see how humans respond, and it's like, oh, they did that, like he's genuinely shocked. Yeah. I don't agree with that. That God is unknowing as to what's happening. Mm-hmm. I view God more as an infinite chess player. You hear people talk about
4D chess.
Yeah, no, right? No, you hear of chess players, good chess players, being able to play multiple moves ahead.
Right.
I don't even know what a good chess player would be. I play negative one move ahead. I'm like, oh no, that happened. Okay. I like checkers. So, but I view, and you see this throughout Scripture, where God makes a move, and he is, I don't want to use the word surprised or shocked, but he is marveled at how someone responds. So you take Abraham, you take, I believe it's Hezekiah, where
15 years of extra
God
life.
spoke, spoke, you will die, and Hezekiah's response moved God's heart. You see this in Jesus as well. He is marveled by people's responses. And so I view God more as an infinite chess player, meaning he's playing infinite moves ahead. Lacey and I actually had a conversation about this, God's sovereignty, and how there are things God has set forth that will happen, but there's a lot of ways to get to those, I call them waypoints. There's a lot of ways God wanted to move people's hearts to get to those waypoints. This is not the conversation I wanted to have. We're talking about evolution.
The conversation has evolved.
Yeah. Well, okay. Did that address your question, Daniel?
Let's go with sure.
Is that a no?
I think that's a podcast in and of itself. Honestly.
Yeah.
If you guys listen to our sovereignty one, all of your questions will be answered. And then you'll have more.
Is that the one that didn't get recorded?
No, this was a big one. The one we were talking about was on dealing with forgiveness and how to resolve. It was a fantastic one. Thanks for bringing that up again, Daniel. I appreciate that. Okay.
He was calm.
I do have
about that
at all. So peaceful. So I do have a few questions in line with some statements made is like being able to determine the date of evolution, date of billions and billions of years. But what dating methods were those dating methods given to us by God? As in, these are ways you can determine how long something's existed, or is that our own interpretation of the data?
Right. The carbon dating you were talking about.
That's one.
For example,
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Or concepts of, and well, it's a good question too, because concepts of measuring time by speed of light or things like that, or constants.
Yeah.
Which are not actually constant.
Right.
That's the fun part.
Well, I mean, you take carbon dating, and it all depends on the atmosphere during the time that it happened, and you throw in, I don't know if you guys land on this, a global flood, that messes up dating as well, right? And so that's what I mean by how do we, with the dating methods given to us, how do we stand firm on, okay, this is this old, or this is what happened?
guess my question is, what do you mean stand firm? Like, why is it important for us to stand firm, and what are we standing firm
Well, because
on?
so it would be like, using one example, dating methods.
Okay.
How whatever. I mean, there's so many different ways. There's the carbon dating. There's the.
I mean, are you asking this from like an apologetic? Like, someone comes at you and says, "Oh, the Earth is this old, and your Bible says it's this old." Like, defend it. Like, is that what you're asking? I don't understand.
I mean, no. I'm just saying our dating methods. So whether you say, I believe in max 10,000 year old Earth or billions of years old Earth, both dating systems are using man-made systems.
Right.
And so there has to be something outside of that. Otherwise, we're just arguing our own perspectives as to what the interpretation of the data says, right? That's what I mean. Like taking evidence of a crime scene, okay? Two people can come in with different experiences and perspectives and come to two different views of what happened, what took place. But they're looking at the same evidence. And so that's what I mean by, so how do we even have that conversation of dating?
I guess I don't, in my own journey, I never really studied anything related to this because it didn't really matter as far as, like the key points to prove that Christianity is true is truth knowable? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? Did Jesus Christ rise from the dead? It's like, so nowhere in there does it matter about carbon dating or how old things are, and like that's so I'm just talking, I'm not saying it's worthless or bad, it's worthless science or it's worthless for a Christian to discover, but I'm just saying, like, I'm not really going to have anything on this, so you guys go.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a good point. I think that's one of those things that I would hold pretty lightly. Because, for instance, there's this, I think I read it, and I think I'm right, just the constants of the universe, speed of the light, or the gravitational constant, or things like that.
Or the constants of quarks.
Right. They're not constant.
At all.
Over time, scientists have discovered that they actually do, I don't know, vibrate might be the right word, between different values and things like that. But they got rid of that by changing the way they measured things to be based on those changes or something like that, if that makes sense. And so...
So you had to change the tool that you use to measure something.
And I think that's in essence the cheat that they did to make that work. Like, they, instead of saying, well, this is what a meter is based on this set thing, they said, oh, a meter is based on this constant value dependent upon the speed of light.
Right.
So therefore, the speed of light is always constant now. It's the meter that changes or something like that. It'd be minuscule amounts, but it's still...
Right. But it would be moving the goalposts in a game of interpreting data.
Or there was a fun thing I was listening to a scientist. It might have been on the Bible podcast, or it might have been on something else that they were, or the Bible Project. But where they were talking about the fact that if the universe was expanding more quickly than it is right now, it's entirely possible that we would never have seen anything in the sky. We would never have had any way of seeing stars out there if the universe was expanding, because it would expand faster than the speed of light, and therefore we wouldn't know light would be able to reach to us. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not out there. We just have no way of seeing it. And so that's always the thing. You have to take into account the inconsistency of the tools that you use to measure, because, like you said, they're man-made.
Right.
And you don't know what has changed. Like, we look at natural law, and we look at the constants, and we say, well, these things are true from the beginning till now. It's like, based on what? Were you here?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing is when people say, well, when we look at evolution, we're able to look at it now.
Right.
Man, I would love to see that. So, okay, the other question.
Well, I think that's an important point to clarify, is because some people say what we do as Christians isn't looking at the science. Because science is only like repeatable experiments. It's like they have that thought in their head, is like, so you're saying like it's not science when someone looks at bones or cave drawings, or you're saying it's not science when someone digs up a city, or you're saying it's not science when someone investigates a crime scene. Like it's all of those things are looking back at something that happened back in time, and we're using, like, this is one of the things, this is one of the reasons why I don't believe in evolution, is because you look at DNA and it's, Bill Gates calls it the most complex computer code ever invented.
He's a scientist.
Well, my point is, it's like, it's like it.
Call him, I'd like you to refer to him as doctor.
Everything that has a beginning has a beginner, right? And everything that, you just look at that and it's like, well, there's no way that could have a natural cause.
Right.
And all of the computer simulations that, like there's guys that spend years of their life trying to develop computer simulations, like, if the conditions were this at the beginning of the universe and we had this happen, then life could form and it would take this long. And the problem is every single one that actually created life, or created like enough DNA together to make a single cell organism, they had parameters in the programs that would like weed out the bad results and only keep the good ones going so that they could form chain reactions together to make a cell. It's like,
right. But even that is proof of a designer, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's so there's just
the other, I guess.
Where was I going with that?
No,
How did that conversation start?
You were talking about
measurement, and then so you talked about measurement. I said that you got to hold these things lightly because measurements are by their very nature kind of there, and then you jumped into not really looking at it from a scientific point of view, but more from a criminology point of view, from a courtroom point of view.
Yeah.
Like science.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Experiments in a courtroom is based on evidence.
That's the point. Like, there's no way with all of this stuff, even if they are doing science, because it happened, a long time ago, and you weren't there, there's no way for anybody to know for sure what happened.
Oh, right. But I think you can also look, though, and use repeatable things.
That's exactly,
right.
Exactly. And that's what I was trying to go with the computer code in DNA, because anytime you see a code, it was created by a human.
Right. Mm-hmm. Intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah. So the other question I have is, it goes along with the moving goalposts, and this is honestly where I get frustrated, is the moving of goalposts when you find a new thing. So for example, they believed, DNA can only live, not break down over a couple hundred years, maybe 1,000 at best, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then all of a sudden they find dinosaurs who died out billions of years ago with DNA intact.
Oh wow! And then they called Jeff Goldblum. And
doesn't that mean? So then obviously you guys were as fact. That's good. I got it. As fact, DNA only lasts this long, which is. But then you move the goalpost by saying, well, obviously we were wrong at how long DNA lasts. It can last billions of years. Well, wait. You have proven scientific methods to show how long DNA lasts. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Isn't that moving the goalpost?
Right, and this is kind of the concept of developing so Emmy asked me the other day, my wife asked me, how do you know weight limits on bridges? I'm like, it's like, well, if you built it and some fell down.
You use evolution.
Right, well, I always loved there's
you evolved the bridges.
Yeah, exactly.
No, Calvin and Hobbes, there's this great line from Calvin and Hobbes where Calvin asks his dad, how do we know weight limit bridges? And Dad's like, well, they just drive bigger and bigger trucks over it until it collapses. And then they rebuild the bridge. And Calvin's like, that's a great idea. And I'm like, I am using that on Peter. And I also said that to Emmy. But the point is like, she asked me that, and I said, well, and I thought, well, technically we did do that. We built enough stuff and it fell over enough that we developed models based on proven experiments, based on observational data, stuff like that. And you do that long enough and you develop those good models, and eventually you can develop a good enough model to determine how much a bridge is going to take if it is. Right. And so that's the same thing, but your model is only as good as the data that goes into it. Right. And I think that's the point you're making, and it is a good point. It feels like I'm ripping down my own point of view a lot, but I think the fact of the matter is that yes, your model can change, but that doesn't mean the overall model was wrong in the first place. It still was closer to where it was, and so you kind of get closer in that concept. And freely admit, if evidence comes out and blows point of view to my pieces, awesome.
Sure.
Well, my pride will take a blow. Well, my pride won't. I won't care. Anyway, but that's the whole point. That's what science should be, is this concept of, well, this is what the evidence shows me right now, so I should base it on this. And if you use that data to develop a theory, if you use that data to run a nuclear engine in a submarine, and it works and you don't kill yourself doing it.
We did lots of Sharpie V-notch tests
Did you know about that?
What?
Never mind.
He used big words. He's used bigger words than me.
They tested
much
stuff.
bigger words than me. Yeah.
They did. Thank you.
They did
oh,
test
okay, I get that.
But you also have Marie Curie. Was Marie Curie
Yeah.
died
Yeah.
based on the
Yeah.
radiation poisoning because they did not know, and so that's the point. Is it should always be evolving. It should always be
Right, but
flexible to the data that's being put into
right,
it.
but it's evolving based on observation.
Yes.
Right. Your bridge analogy, observation.
Yes.
Madame Curie, she was falling apart, literally. Oh, maybe hanging around that kind of metal is bad.
That's not bad. Yeah. But evolution.
Right. Well, yeah. There used to be a scientific consensus that the Earth was flat and the sun.
No, there was never a sign.
Okay, there was a consensus that the sun revolved around the Earth.
With a consensus of one person, like never.
No. Like Copernicus was like
He was
but-
affirming what had already been believed by the Stoics, by the Greeks, by the Persians, by the Asians, not Asians, Chinese. Oh goodness, I might get canceled. Anyway,
You
Orient.
can edit that out. Just bleep it and act like you
I don't
cussed.
edit, man. I don't want people to know I cuss. I'd rather be.
You'd rather be canceled than that.
No, but like it
We're
was.
gonna edit that one out too. Now people know
I'm
you
glad
cuss.
well, we are on YouTube, but I don't care.
Yeah.
Go to our website
one
and
of them.
watch it there. Right, but it's nobody. I do believe in Sasquatch.
That wasn't true. I thought I heard that.
No.
I think the point he's trying to make is, there has been our understanding. Science. What kept science alive? Christians. Christian monasteries. Most scientific experiments during the Dark Ages and Middle Ages were
Almost
Christian.
all
of it.
unanimously,
Yes.
all of in the modern last not centuries, millennia,
Yeah.
majority have been Christian
Right.
scientists.
It is only in
Starting in the Enlightenment.
I think
it
you
is
brought that
only
up,
in
yeah.
the very recent history, the last couple of centuries, that there has started to been this so-called battle between faith and science,
Right.
which was never there before. I mean, yes, there's superstitions in Christianity. Yeah, that nobody's going to deny that, and there are deviations and there are flaws. But for the most part, Isaac Newton was a Christian. Charles Darwin was a Christian. Copernicus, Galileo.
He was a Christian at his death.
Yes. And
Which
Because evolution's not true.
I would argue.
wait, Darwin.
though,
Wait, which one is that?
Darwin.
Darwin
I thought he was a Christian.
at his death.
Oh, okay. You see, that's the point.
He
Even I had
recanted
assumptions.
in Origin of Species. He was wrestling through ideas,
Yeah.
and you say within the last. When was Darwin 18?
Yeah, and that's what I'm not sure, but I know it's not.
Since-
It's not a long-term thing.
Right, but since Darwin, that's when the question between faith and science has been. And that's why he recanted at his deathbed, was because he looked at how some of his thoughts, in Origin of Species.
Isn't that the crazy thing though? Like how like Darwinism it became a religion. And
It did,
like the
yes.
founder was like, no, this isn't true.
Well, but did he actually say it wasn't true because he didn't believe it, or because he saw the damage it was doing?
He saw the damage, and he never went to the conclusions that people
true.
after him made. He genuinely was like, "Is this a theory?"
Mm-hmm.
And the people after him used theory and interchanged it with fact. And so, if
Yes.
you don't believe in this theory,
Yes.
then you are wrong. Well, isn't that the point of a theory? Is to argue against it and prove it wrong
It should
or
still
right?
be considered a theory. I agree with that.
And the hard part, along with like the moving the goalpost, is data based on out and out lies. And you have data with a lot of the models built up
Yeah.
for man's evolution is straight up built on lies.
Yes.
Right, and so it's all of these pieces. To me, I'm like, man, it goes back to what is your kind of starting premise, just like a crime scene. What's my starting premise? Okay, this person has holes in his body. I believe he was shot. I believe he was stabbed. Well, I mean, like, you're looking at same holes, but there's evidence. There's things that you have to do a little bit more observing of. You stab things and you shoot things and see, okay, do those holes line up? Do those,
It sucks to be that volunteer.
well,
But that is the problem. It's like you can't go back and observe what happened at the beginning of the universe and use that, like,
so then you have to go back on what is my starting premise.
right. You have to you have to look at what's observable now, like the law of second. I can't talk. Second law of thermodynamics and general theory of relativity, etc., and laws of logic and laws of non-contradiction.
Right,
but it's funny we refer to them as laws. They're not. That's the funny part.
The law of non-contradiction is
okay. That the logical laws, but the law of thermodynamics, that is still a theory.
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's based on scientific observation, but it's not a law. I guess I just always had a problem because once you start using it, comes back to the language conversation. We should still call it the theory of evolution because it is still a theory because it's non-provable in its way scientifically.
Right.
Evidentiary, you can come to a good grasp of what it is, even though you are right. There's a lot of evidence. It's not very good, but.
So what do you?
There's enough out there. There's always enough been out there, though, that my premise still stands. There's not enough evidence, in my opinion, to nail it down as this happened without any help from God. There's enough flaws in it, but there's also enough things happening out there that I'm like, did God make it look like there's all this time? I mean, or is there something else going on here? And I don't have an answer for that. I don't.
Flood.
The flood, or as always, dinosaurs, or the concept of stars, how stars create matter inside of them, which is the coolest thing in the world. So
crazy.
I know. Yeah. I mean, and that's the attraction sometimes too about these theories is they're so cool to think about. Believing in theory of evolution, creation universe, 13 billion years old. Everything in here was created in a star. It's so fun.
That God
made. Yeah, that God then blew up.
He's spoken.
Yeah. Yes, I know. It all comes back to it. But that's why my friend really, she did have an impact on me in pointing and looking at it, because my brain was always set on, well, it has to be what the Bible says and no other. And she managed to point out that the beauty of science is uncovering how God does things.
Oh, yeah.
Showing how it. And so it's too easy to dismiss that he gave us eyes to see beautiful stars in the sky, even as he talks about them in the Bible. And so he also gave us brains to investigate, even while he tells us who and in a sense, what happened as well. So.
Yeah.
Well, that's the view that I have, because if you look at Genesis and read that in context of thinking about the Big Bang, it certainly seems like, to me, that God caused the Big Bang and then he morphed and changed the universe to his will and shaped it how he wanted. And he could have done that so in my head, it could almost be both of them. God could have caused the Big Bang, and then he could have gone back and in 7 days changed and shaped and morphed based on how it is described literally in the Bible. And why can't that be true? God can do anything, and then he could make the end results look like whatever you wanted them to look like.
Right.
But the point I always go back to is either way, it's God. It had to be some supernatural.
I know.
Not supernatural. What's the word you used?
Well, I actually didn't have.
You said supernatural is a bad word.
Well, I said natural. I mean, it's probably
unnatural miracle.
No,
whatever.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is I took us to that point, and I'm like,
it was a miracle.
And I'm going to back off and let them go with this.
It was a miracle.
It was a miracle.
Yeah,
it was miraculous.
That's the word. Yes.
Right.
So
awesome, guys.
We got to close out, don't we?
We have to close out.
I feel like we didn't. Did we get anywhere today?
I feel like I was proven right.
No,
I feel confident.
I feel like what I feel like we came to is the point that we don't know.
You do have to wrestle with that.
I think we definitely need to.
I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that. But you also have to wrestle with dinosaur bones and other things like that as well. Yes, there are flaws in evolutionary theory. I'm not denying that. I never deny that.
Yeah.
I think this is definitely something we need to split the church over.
Well, yeah, no, that's obvious.
But I think that's the important conclusion.
Lesser things have split the church. This is important.
Science. I think that's the important conclusion to come to is that yes, we must divide.
Well, it's hard, with dividing. I'm going on a tangent here. We got to close out, but whatever.
You're the host.
Even with dinosaur bones, you have to look at You brought up, would it be archaeology, and these cultures and traditions that have stories of fighting beasts, of fighting dragons, of fighting.
I think I brought that up.
Whatever. No, you brought up archaeology or
You did.
Whatever.
That's what he's grasping onto.
Oh, right.
You didn't bring up dragons.
No. But looking at
remember
evidence,
that at
though. No, the scientific evidence of what is it? Where you study?
Daniel talked about how he believed in black dust spots.
Paleontology, archaeology.
Yeah.
No,
But looking at,
I didn't use those fancy words. I just said that.
I don't know.
I just described the fancy
I heard them
words.
somewhere.
Yeah.
all right.
I got it.
Anyways, you look at those, and a lot of them have stories of dragons, these mythical beasts. But how can so many differing cultures have cave paintings, have drawings, have traditions that a lot of them match? You know what I'm saying? Like, and so it's again going back and looking at evidence. Looking at it is could the tools I use to measure time be off, and could these things exist, or could all of these cultures just make up stuff happenstance to match? Those are the hard, like, those are the questions I'm like wrestling with. Is
Right.
Okay.
Right. As we should be.
Yeah.
As we should be.
Yeah. All right.
These are the fun conversations.
Guys, this was great.
Yeah.
We got nowhere and we went nowhere and we did nothing. This was awesome. Good conversation.
I have to agree with what you just said. Yes.
Most of my conversations, I feel like this.
I don't know why, but I have the feeling like your listeners are gonna. This is the worst podcast ever. It's like we didn't.
No, you know what's funny?
I feel like
it's
we
no
didn't do
different than
anything.
our life group listening to us argue with each other.
That's
really.
People, it's just arguing. People like watching people argue.
We didn't even argue that much.
Jerry
We should have
Springer
argued
did.
more.
Well,
We should have argued more.
I did bring my brass knuckles just in case things got crazy.
but I think our
Should've brought
goal,
swords.
Really, my goal coming into this was where's the common ground?
yeah.
Where are the things
Well,
that
that's a
we
good.
can agree about?
Yeah,
even as we
you said that
disagree
earlier,
about
and even
things?
before you
Yeah.
said that point of view, I was going to say something like that too, because
Yeah.
that's the most important thing. You know, it kind of relates to what Pastor Scott was talking about for a few weeks ago. He mentioned that the thought. Actually, it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago because I was gone on the farm. Anyway, the thought that like we shouldn't let politics divide us, because what is the most important thing is
Yes.
sharing the gospel to others, and you know, making disciples of other people, and you know, we're all in this together to get to know God more and reach others who don't know God. So it's like we shouldn't let anything, you know, like this that's not one of the, you know, anything outside of like, you know, the basics, like Jesus
Right.
Christ died on the cross for our sins and that's the only way to heaven. Like, you know, if it's too far away from one of those core, what is it you called it?
Primary beliefs.
Primary beliefs, that primary doctrines. Yeah, it's like,
There we go.
you know, it shouldn't split or divide or, you
Exactly.
know, cause any
And I
hate
would-
or anything like that.
Exactly, and to wrap this up is if you have these
Nathan's gotta have the
conversations,
final
if you
word.
have, I do. It's my show. I get to do
That's
what I want. No, it's
Dang,
what.
this one's long.
Yeah, no, it's what we all came together with. Is if nothing is worth dividing relationship over, and if we can agree on who Jesus is, what he accomplished for us. Again, it goes back to I'm willing to have any conversation. And more important to me is relationship than me being right. And I think that, like, when you're having these conversations with people, are you just wanting to be right and prove others wrong? Or are you genuinely interested in the relationship? Whether you're a Christian speaking to a non-Christian, the only thing that will win people over is faith. That's the whole thing, crux of our belief system is faith, not...
And love.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that. It's faith and it's
hope.
faith. Oh, my goodness.
Hope does not disappoint.
I really hope not.
Faith like a child. He didn't say hope like a child. Anyways.
Jesus loves me, this I know.
The Bible tells me so. All right. Goodbye.
At least you didn't sing the song about the kids and all the different colors. That'd probably get banned on
Red,
YouTube.
yellow, black, and white. They are precious in His
They would have
sight.
gotten canceled already.
Who's Blue Children?
Jesus
What?
loves little children.
I was
There's no
always
blue.
confused about that.
No, there's no
Red,
blue.
yellow, black, and white.
They are precious in His sight. Jesus
Right,
loves the little children of the world.
I was exaggerating.
There is no blue kids. What are
There
you
could
talking
be.
about? Have they been discovered? Have you observed
Have you
blue
watched
children?
movies about King Arthur and the people he fought off? Like, they put blue paint on.
Celts.
It was blue kids.
It was
I've already
paint.
had 3 thoughts in my head that probably would get me in trouble. Let's stop this conversation now.
I'm not recording anymore. Say whatever you have to, Joe.
You're a liar.
Why are we still talking in the microphone?
I put nothing at the end of.
Mute this now, right? Then.
Yeah, but ours are still on. And
I know better. You can leave this on for a while.
It's like Nathan leans into the microphone. Oh, say whatever you want. We're not recording.
Hey guys, I'm not recording anything. Go ahead. Speak.
I'm not wearing a wire at all. Tell me about these illegal activities that are going on here.
All right. This is why I keep recording. This is the one conversation.
I like how you keep saying "all right." Acting like
We're done.
maybe
You gotta get the last word.
Hold on.
Gotta get the last
No
word.
more.
Where is the red light on that thing?
Just as long as Nathan doesn't get the last word.
Don't worry, it wasn't recording.